December 12, 99. 10 kilometers from Delhi, the ground trembled under the hooves of 200,000 horses. A Mongol onslaught was imminent, bringing with it the shadow of an empire that had crushed every kingdom from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna. For 7 decades, the Mongols had epitomized a mounted apocalypse, a brutal force sweeping away dynasties and reducing civilizations to ashes. They had subjugated China, ravaged Persia, brought Russia to its knees, and permanently scarred Europe. Now they stood at India's doorstep, and the entire world held its breath. However, at Kili, something shifted the course of events. Against unimaginable odds, a small sultanate managed to halt this seemingly insurmountable power using an ancient weapon. This is the story of how war elephants, strategic brilliance, and the tragic sacrifice of one general irrevocably shattered the myth of Mongol invincibility.
Before we delve into this epic narrative, for history enthusiasts keen on lesser-known aspects of ancient warfare, consider subscribing to the channel, as we are about to unveil one of humanity's most overlooked military triumphs. It was 1299, and the Mongol Empire, though fragmented, remained the most formidable military machine the world had ever witnessed. Formed almost a century prior through Genghis Khan's conquests, the empire had fractured into 4 uluses after bloody internal conflicts. Yet, each splinter retained the devastating military tactics that had made the Mongols legendary. The Chagatai Khanate, ruling Central Asia, found itself hemmed in on 3 sides by other Mongol states. The Golden Horde controlled the western steppes, the Ilkhanate dominated Persia and the Middle East, and the Yuan dynasty held China.
For Dua Khan, the ambitious ruler of the Chagatai Khanate since the 1280s, only one direction remained for expansion, south, into the wealthy kingdoms of the Indian subcontinent. India represented an invaluable prize. The Delhi Sultanate controlled the fertile Gangetic plains, lands with endless grain fields, thriving cities, and gold-filled temples. These were not barren steppes or frozen tundra. This was a civilization at its zenith, offering untold riches and a strategic position that could transform the Chagatai Khanate into a dominant Mongol power. India's annual agricultural revenue surpassed what most Central Asian territories could produce in a decade. Spices, textiles, precious stones, and skilled artisans offered resources capable of elevating a regional ulus to an imperial superpower. However, India proved surprisingly resilient to Mongol invasions.
Unlike European kingdoms or Chinese dynasties, the Delhi Sultanate had managed to repel several Mongol incursions through a combination of diplomacy, tribute payments, and occasional military victories. The Mongols had tested the waters in 1292 when their vanguard, led by Ulugh Khan, was defeated and captured by Jalal-ud-Din Khalji, the founder of the Khalji dynasty. Approximately 4,000 Mongol warriors surrendered, converted to Islam, and were settled in a Delhi suburb known as Mughal-Pura. Throughout 1296 and 1297, Chagatai forces repeatedly probed the Sultanate's defenses, each time retreating under pressure from Delhi's generals. In the winter of 1297, a Mongol army under the command of Nayan Kadar conducted a deep raid into Punjab, reaching Kasur before being routed by Alauddin Khalji's forces, led by his brother Ulugh Khan. According to the contemporary poet Amir Khusrau, 20,000 Mongols perished in that battle, with many more executed in Delhi after being brought as captives.
A second invasion, led by Saldi, met the same fate at the hands of General Zafar Khan. These defeats were frustrating, but they were merely reconnaissance missions designed to assess the Sultanate's strength. The true invasion, aimed at conquest and governance rather than raiding and pillaging, was yet to come. And this is where the narrative becomes truly intriguing, for the individual destined to defend India was no noble local prince fighting to preserve his ancestral homeland. Alauddin Khalji was a usurper, a regicide, and by many accounts, a tyrant who would make Machiavelli seem like a humanist. In 1296, this nephew of Sultan Jalal-ud-Din assassinated his own uncle and father-in-law, seized the Delhi throne through treachery and violence, and immediately set about consolidating power through a reign of terror. He executed or blinded potential rivals, confiscated the wealth of nobles who had supported the previous regime, and established such an extensive spy network that, According to chroniclers, a person could not utter rebellious words in their own bedroom without Alauddin Khalji learning of it. Yet, despite his brutality, Alauddin possessed something rare among medieval rulers: genuine military genius combined with brilliant administrative capabilities. He understood that defeating the Mongols required more than just brave warriors and sturdy fortifications. He needed a professional, standing army, paid in cash rather than land grants, ensuring their personal loyalty. He imposed strict price controls to feed his soldiers, ruthlessly raised taxes to fund continuous military campaigns, and established a system of fortifications along the northwestern frontier. Crucially, however, he meticulously studied his adversary. Through accounts from survivors of past Mongol encounters, prisoners, and merchants traveling the Silk Road, he collected intelligence on Mongol tactics. He was keenly aware of the Mongols' mastery of the famous feigned retreat. This devastating tactic involved simulating a chaotic rout, luring pursuing enemies into ambushes where fresh reserves would encircle and annihilate them. The Mongols relied on speed, mobility, and their formidable composite bow, an engineering marvel capable of piercing armor from 200 paces away. Their horses were hardy, able to traverse long distances for weeks without special feed, granting Mongol armies a strategic reach that instilled terror in settled civilizations. Yet, Alauddin uncovered a potential vulnerability, something the Mongols had never encountered in their conquests of China, Persia, Rus, or Eastern Europe. Something massive, terrifying, and uniquely Indian: war elephants.
The use of elephants in warfare in India spanned over 3,000 years. These were not circus animals. They were living tanks, reaching 4 meters at the shoulder and weighing 5 to 6 tons, comprised of bone, muscle, and untamed aggression. An adult male elephant possessed the strength to literally tear a man in half with its trunk, impale enemies with iron-tipped tusks, and trample armored cavalry into the mud. The elephants used by the Delhi Sultanate were specifically trained and outfitted for war. Howdahs, wooden platforms protected by shields, were mounted on their backs, housing up to 4 warriors armed with bows, javelins, and even early firearms. The elephants themselves wore armor plates of iron, shielding their heads, chests, and flanks. Blades were affixed to their tusks, and heavy iron chains with spiked balls were attached to their trunks, which the elephants were trained to wield with crushing force.
Let me clarify what modern historians sometimes downplay. These animals were absolutely terrifying on the ancient battlefield. Imagine being a Mongol horse archer, the elite of elites, a warrior who has conquered half the world. You face Chinese crossbowmen, Persian heavy cavalry, and Rus princes. And then, through the dust and chaos of battle, you see something that shouldn't exist. A creature 3 times taller than a man, armored like a fortress, from which warriors unleash arrows, charging directly at you. The ground shakes beneath its feet. Your horse, that reliable companion that has carried you across continents, takes one look at this beast and goes mad. Horses experience an instinctive terror of elephants. They smell them from hundreds of meters away, and that scent triggers a primal panic response. A horse that would charge into a forest of spears will unequivocally refuse to approach an elephant. For cavalry-based armies like the Mongols, this was a game-changing problem. The tactical deployment of elephants was devastating. War elephants served as mobile fortresses, capable of breaching enemy formations through sheer physical might. A line of charging elephants could smash cavalry attacks, shatter infantry squares, and create gaps in enemy lines that friendly forces could exploit. During sieges, elephants could batter down gates or serve as elevated platforms for archers, but perhaps their greatest value was psychological. The sight and sound of war elephants, especially for enemies who had never encountered them, induced a paralyzing fear. Mongol tactical doctrine heavily relied on the controlled mobility of their cavalry. If your horses refuse to charge, refuse even to maintain formation near the enemy, your entire military system collapses.
Properly employed, war elephants transformed from a weapon into a system of denial that prevented the Mongols from implementing their standard tactics. Of course, elephants were not invulnerable. They had significant weaknesses that cunning opponents could exploit. Prolonged archery fire could wound them severely, to the extent that they would panic and potentially rampage through their own ranks. Specialized weapons, such as caltrops, could cripple them. Incendiary arrows could drive them to terror. And if the mahout, driver, perished, the elephant became unpredictable. The Romans developed effective anti-elephant tactics during the Punic Wars, using disciplined infantry to create gaps through which the elephants would harmlessly pass. However, here's the crucial point. The Mongols had never before encountered elephants in battle. Throughout their 70 years of conquests, every foe they had quashed was familiar with their style of warfare.
Now they faced an unknown element, and the unfamiliar carries inherent dangers. Alauddin Khilji grasped this reality. He couldn't match the Mongols in cavalry numbers or mobility, but he didn't need to. His goal was to construct a defensive mechanism capable of absorbing their initial assault, disrupting their horsemen, and then launching a coordinated counterattack using combined forces. The Delhi Sultanate's military might was itself a blend of traditions. The ruling class was predominantly Turkic, emphasizing Central Asian mounted archery. Yet, they had also assimilated Indian martial customs, including the deployment of war elephants and shielded infantry. By 1299, Alauddin Khilji had forged this hybrid force into a formidable power. His army comprised heavy cavalry wielding lances and swords, light cavalry armed with composite bows, infantry equipped with spears and shields, and elephants serving as mobile fortresses.
According to the 15th century historian Firishta, Alauddin Khilji's army at Kili reportedly numbered 300,000 men and 2,700 war elephants. Modern scholars generally consider these figures to be gross exaggerations. More realistic assessments place the Delhi forces at between 30,000 and 70,000 troops, with perhaps 700 elephants. What truly made Alauddin's army effective was not its size, but its structure. He organized his army into 5 major divisions, showcasing his innovative approach. Each division featured 22 elephants positioned at the forefront, forming a living barrier between his forces and the Mongol cavalry. Consider the strategic implications. An unbroken line of over 100 war elephants, each carrying armed warriors, each radiating such dread that it could trigger widespread panic among Mongol horses. Behind this elephantine wall stood cavalry and infantry, shielded from the initial Mongol arrow volleys and cavalry charges.
The Mongols would either have to break through the elephants or maneuver around them. Both options would disrupt their formations and negate their speed advantage. This was a defensive stroke of genius, utilizing an ancient weapon system in a novel way to counter the most advanced military force of its era. Before we continue the narrative of what transpired when these two forces clashed, let me pose a question to you. Do you believe the Mongols could have developed a counter-tactic if given adequate preparation time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you find this engaging, a quick like would significantly help the algorithm in reaching other history enthusiasts. In late summer 1299, Qutlugh Khwaja, the son of Dua Khan and a prince of the Chagatai clan, assembled the largest Mongol army ever dispatched towards India. Chronicler accounts vary wildly, ranging from 60,000 to 200,000 horsemen. The truth likely lies somewhere between 50,000 and 80,000 cavalry, indicating an enormous commitment of resources. This was no mere raid. Raids might involve 10 or 20,000 horsemen. This was an invading army, equipped with everything necessary for conquest. The journey from Central Asia to Delhi spanned over 1,000 miles, traversing mountain passes, river crossings, scorching deserts, and fertile valleys. It took 6 months, but Qutlugh Khwaja operated under specific directives: no looting, no destruction, preserve forces for the decisive battle. Such discipline was uncharacteristically stringent for Mongol armies, but Qutlugh Khwaja intended to govern India, not reduce it to rubble. Burned cities yielded no tax revenue. The Mongols, drawing lessons from their conquest of China, understood that managing vast agrarian societies necessitated preserving their functionality. As they crossed the Punjab, the Mongol army bypassed fortified cities like Multan and Samana, avoiding the delays of sieges. They ignored villages and towns, maintaining strict march discipline, but their movement wasn't invisible. News of their advance traveled faster than their army itself, carried by terrified refugees and Delhi's border scouts. At night, Delhi's generals launched harassing raids, striking Mongol camps to disrupt their rest. Alauddin's general, Zafar Khan, dispatched a messenger to Qutlugh Khwaja with a direct challenge. "Come fight me here." The Mongol prince's response revealed the arrogance permeating Mongol military culture. "Kings fight kings," he declared. "Tell your Zafar Khan to fight under Sultan Alauddin's standard in Delhi."
This was a calculated insult, dismissively portraying Zafar Khan as unworthy of attention and asserting that only Alauddin Khilji was a suitable adversary. When word reached Delhi that the Mongol army had reached Kili, just 10 kilometers from the city outskirts, panic erupted. People from surrounding areas streamed into the capital. The streets became impassable. Mosques overflowed with refugees seeking divine intervention. Market prices skyrocketed as merchant caravans ceased their arrivals. The psychological impact arguably surpassed the physical danger. Delhi had never witnessed such a formidable Mongol army positioned so close. Alauddin convened his war council in his military encampment near Siri. His uncle, Alumo, advocated for diplomacy, stressing that the Mongols were too numerous, too powerful, and too near. He urged negotiations, offering tribute and buying time.
Other nobles echoed this sentiment, pointing out that the Mongols had never been decisively defeated in a major confrontation. Why should Delhi be an exception? Alauddin dismissed their counsel with words that revealed his deep understanding of politics and human psychology. He declared that if he displayed weakness now, his people would lose faith in him, and his soldiers would lose respect. Should that happen, his reign would end, irrespective of a Mongol attack. He grasped that medieval states depended on perceived strength. A sultan who paid tribute out of fear would only provoke insurrections from ambitious generals. He intended to advance to Kili and fight, but he wasn't reckless. Alauddin instructed Alam to remain in command of Delhi with specific guidelines. All city gates were to be shut, except for the Badon gate, which led northeast. In the event of defeat, Alam was to surrender the palace keys to the victor and flee with the treasury. This survival strategy ensured that even if Delhi fell, the Sultanate could continue from an alternative base. Meanwhile, Zafar Khan had already engaged the Mongols near the Yamuna River, resulting in disaster. Acting without Alauddin's explicit approval, driven by bravery and a craving for glory, Zafar led his troops to confront the Mongol crossing. The battle was brief and brutal. The Mongols shattered Zafar's contingent, sending them scrambling back towards Delhi. This initial setback sent shockwaves through the Sultanate's command. If Zafar Khan, one of their finest generals, could be so easily overwhelmed, what hope did the others have? But Alauddin did not panic. He analyzed. Zafar's defeat suggested that the Mongols were supremely confident, perhaps even overconfident. They refrained from pursuing Zafar's scattered force all the way to Delhi's walls, presumably saving their strength for a decisive battle. This afforded Alauddin time to summon all his forces and pinpoint a battleground. The Mongol army encamped at Kili on the open plains, an ideal terrain for cavalry operations. Qutlugh Khwaja organized his forces into the traditional 4 divisions: center, right wing, left wing, and reserve. Each division comprised light cavalry, horse archers, and heavier cavalry for close quarters combat. Mongol tactics emphasized coordination. Light cavalry initiated combat with arrows, disrupting enemy formations. If the enemy charged, the light cavalry retreated, luring them into killing zones where the heavy cavalry awaited. Qutlugh himself commanded from the center, encircled by his personal guard, the elite of elites. His senior officers were veterans who had spent their entire adult lives on horseback. They could shoot arrows with deadly precision while galloping at full speed, demonstrating a complete mastery of warfare. Having witnessed Chinese cities collapse, Persian fortresses crumble, and Russian princes humiliated, they were confident, and rightly so. They had never tasted defeat. Alauddin's army marched from Siri to Kili and deployed in its innovative 5-division formation. The Sultan commanded the center. Zafar, burning with a desire to redeem his earlier defeat, commanded the right wing. Qutlugh Khan commanded the left wing. 2 reserve divisions waited behind, and 22 war elephants stood at the front of each division, serving as living fortifications. Before the battle, Qutlugh dispatched 4 envoys to Alauddin's camp. They proclaimed that the army he faced was unparalleled in Hindustan, requesting permission to pass his camp and learn the names of his chief officers. This was arrogance thinly veiled as diplomacy. Alauddin refused, sending them back with a challenge. Come and learn our names on the battlefield. On the night before the battle, both camps made their final preparations. Mongol shamans performed rituals. Delhi's soldiers prayed towards Mecca. Weapons were sharpened, armor was checked, and horses were fed. Men wrote final letters to their families, and Alauddin issued his sternest order. No unit commander was to move from their assigned position without his explicit direct orders. Disobedience carried the penalty of immediate decapitation. This was not cruelty, but an understanding that discipline would be the deciding factor between victory and utter annihilation. The Mongol feigned retreat had destroyed countless armies, and Alauddin would not allow it to happen to his. As dawn broke on that December morning in 1299, fog shrouded the plains. The air was cool. The 2 armies faced each other across 2 kilometers of open ground, and the fate of India hung in the balance. However, the narrative takes a tragic turn here, because the outcome of this battle hinged not just on Alauddin's brilliant strategy or the terrifying might of war elephants, but also on the impulsive bravery and ultimate sacrifice of one individual, whose name would be expunged from official records for the offense of being excessively heroic. Zafar Khan was a multifaceted figure. He served as Alauddin's general, undoubtedly, but also vied with him for glory. In the preceding Battle of Jalandhar in 1298, Zafar had spearheaded the forces that decimated a Mongol incursion, earning immense public acclaim, which stirred Alauddin's envy. He was renowned as the slayer of Mongols. Such popularity was perilous in Alauddin's court, where successful generals could pose a threat. The battle didn't commence with an order from Alauddin. Rather, it began with Zafar's insubordination. Perhaps it was the lingering shame of a past defeat that fueled him, or a desperate desire to reclaim his standing. Maybe he simply couldn't tolerate the Mongol left flank taunting the Delhi troops any longer. Disregarding Alauddin's command and in flagrant defiance of the Sultan's explicit instructions, Zafar charged forth with his right flank cavalry in a swift assault on the Mongol left wing. War elephants advanced, their trumpeting echoing across the battlefield, their armored forms emerging from the mist like animated ancient siege weapons. The ground trembled beneath their bulk. For many Mongol warriors encountering this offensive, it marked their initial encounter with war elephants. They might have heard tales, but stories failed to convey the chilling reality. The Mongol left flank watched their horses panic. This wasn't a failure of discipline. Even the most well-trained steppe horse couldn't overcome instinctive terror. First, the smell overwhelmed them, triggering primal reactions. Then, the sight. Colossal creatures, 3 times the height of a horse, advancing with relentless power. The piercing sound of trumpeting cut through the din of battle. The horses went mad. They reared, unseating riders. They kicked, attempting to break free. They galloped away. The Mongol left wing crumbled, not due to cowardice. They faltered because their horses became uncontrollable. Cavalry whose mounts refused to advance cannot fight. The formation dispersed as warriors struggled to stay in their saddles, retreating in disarray. Zafar Khan, exploiting the enemy's flight and anticipating victory, pressed his advantage. His cavalry surged forward, cutting down fleeing Mongols. The Mongol left wing was scattered, and Zafar made a fatal error. He pursued them for 18 kos, approximately 55 kilometers. Zafar's cavalry chased the retreating Mongols. The pursuit lasted for hours. The cavalry stretched for miles. The elephants lagged, too slow. The infantry couldn't keep up. Soon, only Zafar Khan and perhaps 1,000 horsemen remained, deep within territory where Mongol reinforcements could appear from any direction. And then the trap sprung. The Mongol left wing hadn't fled in fear. They had executed a masterful feigned retreat, using the elephant's impact as an opportunity. From hidden positions, the Mongol right wing and reserves emerged, attacking from both flanks with coordinated movements. Within minutes, thousands of Delhi horsemen found themselves surrounded by approximately 20,000 Mongol warriors. On the main battlefield, Alauddin observed the unfolding events. His officers urged him to send reinforcements, but Alauddin refused. Historical sources allude to this cautiously, but the implications are clear. Alauddin possessed the means to attempt a rescue. He chose not to, preferring to allow his rival general to perish. Zafar Khan, alive and victorious, would have posed an even greater threat to Alauddin's authority. Zafar Khan dead, yet heroically, was a manageable outcome. Thus, Zafar Khan and his 1,000 warriors faced their demise alone. They formed a defensive circle, horses in the center, men facing outward. The Mongols didn't immediately charge. They stood at a distance, unleashing volley after volley of arrows. Men fell, horses screamed, and the circle tightened, but they continued to fight. When arrows ran out, Zafar's men attacked in small groups. The combat lasted for hours. Zafar himself sustained multiple wounds. His horse was killed beneath him. Finally, bleeding from a dozen injuries, surrounded by fallen warriors, Zafar Khan was captured. He was brought before Qutlugh Khwaja. The Mongol prince, impressed by the general's valor, made an offer. "Join us, become a Mongol commander. I will make you the Sultan of Delhi, ruling in my name."
Consider the power, the position denied by Alauddin, who abandoned you. Zafar Khan refused. The man who had defied his own sultan's orders, who had every reason to despise Alauddin, nevertheless remained loyal. "I will not betray my faith or my people," he declared. Qutlugh commanded. Zafar Khan and all survivors were immediately executed. He was killed in sight of both armies. Meanwhile, the main battle devolved into a protracted stalemate. Alauddin maintained a tight formation, only allowing for limited displays of force. He wasn't pursuing a decisive victory. Rather, his goal was to avoid defeat and keep his army cohesive while the Mongols wore themselves out against an elephant wall. This tactic proved effective. The Mongol cavalry found themselves unable to breach this formidable barrier. Every attempted assault was met with panicked horses refusing to advance. The elephants held their ground steadfastly, while archers in their howdahs rained down arrows. Mongol commanders, including Qutlugh Khwaja himself, rode forward to personally direct the attacks. It was during one of these chaotic skirmishes, following Zafar Khan's execution, that Qutlugh Khwaja sustained a severe injury. The specific details of how remain shrouded in mystery. Whether it was an arrow from a howdah, a javelin, or a sword blow, we cannot be certain. What is known, however, is that the Mongol prince was gravely wounded, bleeding profusely, and incapacitated from further command. The impact on Mongol morale was immediate and devastating. In armies where leadership was intensely personal, the loss of a commander shattered unity. Qutlugh was not merely wounded, he was clearly dying. High-ranking Mongol officers swiftly convened a war council. They had lost their supreme commander. Casualties were far higher than anticipated, and no breakthrough had been achieved. The war elephants had proven significantly more effective than previously thought. Compounding this was the strategic situation. They were 1,000 miles from their base, at the end of a vulnerable supply line. If Qutlugh died, who would lead? There was no obvious second-in-command capable of keeping the army together. A decision was made. They would retreat under cover of darkness, carrying the dying Qutlugh northwest. Alauddin then faced the decision of whether to pursue. His officers strongly advocated for aggression, but Alauddin recognized the inherent dangers. The Mongol army, though battered, retained much of its strength. A poorly organized pursuit could easily turn into another trap. His own army was weary. Crucially, Alauddin had achieved his main strategic objective. Delhi was safe. Why risk transforming a defensive victory into an offensive defeat? He let them go. The Mongols retreated northward, and Qutlugh Khwaja perished en route before reaching the territory of the Chagatai Ulus. He was likely around 20 years old.
From birth, he had been groomed to lead armies. Now, his body was being returned home in dishonor. For Dua Khan, this news was a crushing blow. Not only had the campaign failed, but his son, his heir, was dead. Alauddin returned to Delhi, where jubilant crowds cheered his name, yet one name remained conspicuously unsung. Zafar Khan, the man whose charge had broken the Mongol left flank, whose pursuit led to the trap where Qutlugh was wounded, whose sacrifice may have saved the battle, received no accolades. Alauddin made it clear that Zafar's death was a consequence of his own reckless disobedience. The court understood the implication. No poets immortalized Zafar Khan's final stand. His family received no rewards. His name was expunged from official chronicles. He became a non-person, erased by a sultan who could not afford to acknowledge that anyone else might deserve praise for the victory. To me, this stands as one of the most tragic injustices in an era rife with them. Zafar Khan was flawed. He disobeyed orders, fell for a classic tactic, and cost thousands of lives. Yet, he also fought with suicidal bravery. He rejected an offer of power to remain loyal to a sultan who betrayed him, and his actions directly contributed to the Mongols' defeat. He deserved a better fate than being wiped from history by a paranoid tyrant. However, the people of Delhi remembered. Ordinary soldiers recounted stories of Zafar Khan's final charge, of how he slew thousands before falling. Folk songs glorified him, and mothers named their sons after him. In unofficial history, Zafar Khan lived on as the true hero of Kili. And perhaps that is a finer legacy than any official chronicle. If you are still watching, you clearly appreciate in-depth historical analysis. Please subscribe and enable notifications for more detailed explorations. And allow me to ask, do you believe Alauddin was justified in sacrificing Zafar Khan? Was it cold strategic genius or unforgivable betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The immediate aftermath of the Battle of Kili sent shockwaves across Asia. The Mongols, who had subjugated everything from Korea to Hungary, had been halted in India. Not merely defeated in a minor skirmish, but compelled to retreat from a major invasion, having achieved none of their objectives. The psychological impact of this event cannot be overstated. For 70 years, the Mongols' reputation for invincibility was their greatest weapon. Cities surrendered without a fight. Kingdoms paid tribute to avoid invasion. Kili irrevocably shattered that aura. If Delhi could defeat the Mongols, then the Mongols were not invincible. They were merely another military force, undeniably potent, but not the supernatural entity they had seemed. This understanding rippled across the medieval world. In realms like Persia, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, rulers began re-evaluating their strategies. Resistance now appeared feasible. Victory felt within reach. However, Dua Khan remained unappeased. The death of his son demanded retribution. In 1303, he dispatched another massive army under Teragay's command, reportedly numbering 120,000, with orders to seize Delhi. This invasion struck at the worst possible moment for Alauddin. The Sultan was then besieging Chittor, hundreds of miles to the southwest, and a significant portion of his army was engaged there. Another segment was deployed even further south. Yet this time, the Mongols encountered a different scenario. Alauddin had spent the preceding 4 years constructing the Siri fort, a formidable stronghold specifically designed to counter Mongol incursions. The fort's strategic placement, with the Yamuna River encircling 3 sides, rendered it virtually impregnable. Upon receiving intelligence of the approaching Mongols, Alauddin executed a forced march, covering hundreds of miles in record time to reach Delhi before the Mongols could initiate a siege. He withdrew his troops into Siri Fort and braced for the impending siege. When the Mongols arrived and discovered their foe entrenched in an unassailable position, they settled in for a siege. For 2 months, the two armies remained locked in a standoff. The Mongols deployed every tactic: feigned retreats, bribery attempts, and psychological warfare. Alauddin steadfastly refused to fall for their tricks. He possessed ample provisions, water, strong fortifications, and unwavering patience. The Mongols, encamped outdoors through the winter, began to suffer from the heat, disease, and the escalating costs of sustaining such a vast army far from its supply bases. Ultimately, Taragay retreated, not due to a battlefield defeat, but because the siege had become unbearable.
Once more, the Mongols withdrew from India without achieving their conquest. The pattern was clear. Mongol armies could secure tactical victories, but they couldn't overcome the combination of fortifications, war elephants, and Alauddin's resolute refusal to engage in the decisive battle they craved. The third major invasion transpired in 1305. This time, the Mongols circumvented Delhi and advanced southeast towards the wealthy cities of the Gangetic Plain. But Alauddin had positioned his forces to counter this. General Malik Nayak, commanding 30,000 cavalrymen, intercepted the Mongol forces at Amroha and utterly annihilated them in battle. The confrontation was so one-sided that historical accounts describe it as a massacre. Between 8,000 and 9,000 Mongol captives were brought to Delhi, and Alauddin ordered their public execution.
Their heads were embedded into the walls of Siri. The fort earned a new moniker, the Fort of Heads, a grim monument and a psychological message to future invaders. The final significant Mongol invasion during Alauddin's reign occurred in 1306 and was the largest yet. 3 Tumans advanced along the Ravi River. Alauddin dispatched his most ruthless general, Malik Kafur, promising him a year's salary as a bonus for victory. Malik Kafur's army intercepted the Mongols and crushed them so completely that some units fled all the way back to Rajasthan. Captives were brought back to be sold in Delhi's slave markets, and then, almost anticlimactically, the invasion ceased. Dua Khan died in 1306, and the ensuing succession crisis consumed the full attention of the Chagatai Mongols. India was forgotten. After 6 major confrontations over 9 years, the Mongols finally accepted what should have been obvious. India was not worth the cost. War elephants, fortifications, heat, disease, and fanatical resistance, all combined to render conquest impractical. Let's appreciate the scale of Alauddin's achievements between 1299 and 1306. He defeated the Mongols 6 times. During this same period, the Mongols remained the dominant power across much of Asia. The Yuan dynasty controlled China. The Ilkhanate ruled Persia. The Golden Horde held sway over Russia. Every other major civilization was either conquered by the Mongols or bought them off with tribute. Only the Delhi Sultanate repeatedly fought them and emerged victorious. And the secret weapon that enabled this wasn't solely the war elephants. It was Alauddin's entire defensive system. Fortifications, a professional, cash-paid army, a sophisticated logistical network, strong intelligence gathering, the integration of diverse military traditions into a flexible and responsive force, and a willingness to learn from both defeats and triumphs. Alauddin studied the Mongols like a chess grandmaster analyzes an opponent's game. He identified their tactics, strengths, and weaknesses, and built a military system specifically engineered to counter them. The war elephants were the most conspicuous element, the part that provided excellent material for tales. These beasts were absolutely pivotal, particularly at Kili, where they acted as both physical barriers and a psychological weapon for which the Mongols had no counter. However, elephants alone weren't enough. The true hidden advantage lay in calculated military innovations combined with strategic patience. This often goes unrecognized. Logic frequently wins wars more effectively than tactics. The Mongols were masters of logistics, capable of sustaining armies across continental distances. Yet, even Mongol logistics had their limits. Operating thousands of miles from their home base in unfamiliar territory, facing an adversary who controlled local resources and could withdraw to fortified positions, the Mongols found themselves at a disadvantage, perhaps for the first time. Alauddin exploited this mercilessly. Once the invasion ended, Alauddin turned his attention to expansion. Having secured the north, he launched aggressive campaigns southward and westward, conquering Gujarat, Ranthambore, Chittor, Malwa, Sawana, and Jalore. These victories dismantled several Hindu dynasties, extending the Delhi Sultanate to its greatest extent. His slave general, Malik Kafur, led even more ambitious expeditions into southern India, exacting tribute from the Yadava, Kakatiya, and Hoysala kingdoms. However, Alauddin's triumphs came at an immense cost. His taxation policies were crushing, designed to maximize revenue to fund his military. His spy network was so pervasive that normal political life became untenable. When a community of Islamized Mongols in Delhi was implicated in a conspiracy, Alauddin ordered the slaughter of 30,000 individuals in a single day. It is this moral ambiguity that adds far more depth to history than simple narratives of heroes and villains. Alauddin Khilji saved Indian civilization from the Mongol onslaught. This is not an exaggeration. Had the Mongols conquered India in 1299, 1303, or 1306, the subcontinent's history would have been entirely different. The cultural and religious institutions preserved under the Delhi Sultanate might have been annihilated. The synthesis of Indian and Islamic cultures characteristic of the later Mughal civilization might never have occurred. Nevertheless, Alauddin was a tyrant, a murderer, a ruler whose brutality scarred an entire generation. The same administrative efficiency that ensured the success of his anti-Mongol campaign made his oppression incredibly effective. It's impossible to separate one from the other. The war machine that crushed the Mongols was funded by taxes that ruined farmers. The loyalty that held his army together was bought with confiscated wealth and brutally enforced discipline. History does not offer us simple heroes, only complex individuals making momentous decisions under impossible circumstances. This brings me back to the question of the secret weapon, for here lies a deeper truth. The real secret wasn't a specific technology or tactic, but a willingness to do whatever was necessary for survival. Alauddin murdered his uncle to seize power because he believed he needed absolute authority to defeat the Mongols. He erased Zafar Khan from history because he couldn't risk a popular general becoming a threat. He enforced harsh controls because financing a professional army demanded it. I'm not saying this to glorify tyranny or to argue that the ends justify any means. I am pointing out that historical success is often achieved by people willing to make moral compromises that seem horrifying to us. The Mongols themselves succeeded through a policy of genocide, utterly destroying any city that resisted, to create such pervasive terror that future adversaries surrendered. Alauddin matched them in ruthlessness and outmaneuvered them at their own game. The legacy of Kili and subsequent Mongol defeats extends far beyond immediate military victories. The Mongols' inability to conquer India marked the southern boundary of their expansion. From 1206 to 1299, Mongol armies seemed capable of conquering anywhere they chose. After 1306, it became clear that they had limitations. This encouraged resistance in other parts of Southeast Asia. Kingdoms that might have capitulated instead chose to fight. In the Middle East, the Mamluks of Egypt solidified their position. Battle elephants, ironically, were supplanted centuries later by gunpowder weaponry. At the Battle of Panipat in 1526, Mughal forces under Babur used cannons to terrify Sultan Ibrahim Lodi's war elephants, causing them to panic and trample their own troops. The very same weapon system that halted the Mongols at Kili became a vulnerability against early modern firearms. But in 1299, at that specific moment, war elephants represented a tactical answer to cavalry-based steppe warfare, for which the Mongols had no response. Sometimes, the most effective weapon is simply that which your adversary isn't prepared for. What I find most fascinating about this narrative is the narrow margin by which events could have diverged. If Qutlugh Khwaja hadn't been wounded, if the Mongols had successfully adapted tactics against the elephants during the battle, or if Alauddin Khilji had dispatched reinforcements to save Zafar Khan, only for those forces to be ambushed and annihilated, the entire conflict might have ended in a Mongol triumph. Had Delhi fallen in 1299, the psychological impact would have been devastating. Other Indian kingdoms might have capitulated without resistance. The Mongols could have swept through India in a campaign mirroring their successes elsewhere. History, more often than we prefer to acknowledge, pivots on such critical junctures. We tend to construct narratives of inevitability. Yet, the truth reveals that chance, individual choices, and sheer luck play an enormous role. Zafar Khan's decision to attack was tactically unsound, but it drew the Mongol forces into an engagement that led to Qutlugh Khwaja's injury. Alauddin Khilji's choice to abandon Zafar Khan was morally questionable, but it preserved his core forces. Qutlugh Khwaja's resolution to personally lead charges was courageous, but it exposed him to incidental battlefield injuries. Alter just one of these factors, and the outcome could have been drastically different. This is precisely why I delve into history and create these videos. It's why understanding these medieval clashes remains pertinent even in the 21st century, because the lessons are timeless. Numerical superiority doesn't guarantee victory. Technological surprise can overcome conventional advantages. Defensive systems tailored for specific threats can defeat adversaries with superior overall capabilities. Morale and psychological factors hold as much weight as material ones. Ruthless leadership occasionally achieves what more noble approaches cannot. History is far more intricate, morally ambiguous, and captivating than any simplistic rendition. So, what takeaways do we glean from the Battle of Kili in 1299? That war elephants routed the Mongol army? True, but not entirely. That Alauddin Khilji's military brilliance saved India? Indeed, though at a significant human cost. That Zafar Khan's sacrifice enabled the victory? True, yet he also defied orders and fell into a classic trap.
The real answer encompasses all these dimensions simultaneously. It's a complex web of causation, intentions, and happenstance, of heroism and villainy, defying easy summarization. The echoes of that December day in 1299 manifest both overtly and subtly. The Mughal Empire, which later conquered India, traced its lineage to Timur, who in turn claimed descent from Genghis Khan. But the Mughals learned from the Chagatais' failures. They employed gunpowder weaponry, which neutralized war elephants. They established administrative systems that engaged local elites. They forged a syncretic culture, blending Indian, Persian, and Central Asian traditions. In a sense, the Mongol conquest of India was eventually realized, but only after lessons were painfully absorbed at Kili. Today, one can walk near the site where Siri once stood in Old Delhi. While much of the fortifications have been absorbed by urban development, and war elephants have long since vanished, replaced by traffic congestion, their memory endures in folk songs and local legends. In the tales grandparents tell of the day when monstrous beasts saved Delhi from the Mongols. Zafar Khan, erased from official histories, lives on in popular memory as a hero. Sometimes, popular history is more accurate than royal accounts. Here's my final question for you, one I genuinely want you to ponder. If you were one of Alauddin Khilji's advisors, what counsel would you offer? To fight or to negotiate with the Mongols? Would the potential cost in lives be worth preserving independence? Would you sacrifice Zafar Khan to save the army? These aren't hypothetical questions. We confront versions of them every time we decide how to respond to threats, how to balance security with liberty, how to weigh individual lives against collective survival. The Battle of Kili in 1299 stands as one of humanity's most significant yet underrated military triumphs. A victory of innovation over tradition, of defensive strategy over offensive shock, of systematic preparation over individual genius. The secret weapon wasn't solely the war elephants, though they were crucial. It was the entire approach, learning from the enemy, adapting traditional resources to new tactical situations, maintaining discipline under pressure, and possessing the ruthless resolve to do whatever was necessary for victory. These lessons remain highly relevant. Whether you're delving into ancient conflicts or current geopolitical landscapes, leading legions or overseeing enterprises,